Hello, everyone. I'm Tammy Cowart. I teach business law and business ethics here at UT Tyler, and am also involved in the UT Tyler Center for Ethics. And I want to talk to you today about 5 steps that are helpful for you in creating and then managing your projects. So, first of all, I think what's really important is for you to understand what is your goal? What do you really want to accomplish as you work towards this particular project that you have? So, in order to understand sort of what is your goal, it's in the beginning important to understand what is the need. What need are you trying to meet? And we'll take an example of a campus beautification project, let's say. So, if you think, oh, I think it would be great if we engaged in a project where we wanted to beautify things on our campus. You might sit down with others in your group and look around and say, well, our the grounds around our building don't look very nice, and so there's a need. We want students or faculty and others and around the school to feel like it's a pretty place to come. So that may be the need that you identify. And then secondly, what is the scope? So are you just going to focus on the high school, or are you going to have a little larger scope? Maybe you're going to focus on the elementary school and the high school. Maybe your scope is actually even larger than that, and you think, well, we want to do a beautification project in our city. Or do you want to do something on a state level, or maybe even on a national level, if you're really ambitious? So it's important to understand what is the scope of your project. Then the third piece in this first step is determining who needs to be involved. And so there are some things that you may decide to engage in where you may need additional people involved. So you may need, for our campus beautification example, you might need someone who's involved in groundskeeping. Maybe the school does have a landscape company, so you would need to involve them. If you're going to be digging holes, then there may be water lines involved. And so you might need to contact city utility officials to ask for their input. Where are the water lines? So it's also important when you're defining your goal and what you want to do to know who needs to be involved. And then finally, as we get to the end and we talk about measuring our outcomes, you need to know who's going to benefit from this. And so again, that's going to depend on the need and the scope. And when you look at, is this going to be just for the school? Is just going to be for, is it on the playground, let's say at the back of the school? Because then, maybe fewer people will benefit. If you're going to do campus beautification at the front of the school, then maybe you'll have a greater number of people who could benefit from your project. Secondly, once you've determined what the goal is and who needs to be involved, then you need to create some action items for that. So it's good once you understand sort of what your goal is to have a brainstorming session with your group for ideas. Everybody sort of come up with, okay, if here's our goal and here's the scope, and we know who needs to be involved and we know who's going to benefit, then what are some ideas to implement our goal? What will be done? What are the steps that we need to take in order to accomplish some of those ideas? Sometimes that will help you determine, well, this idea is a good idea, but it's going to be very difficult for us to accomplish, maybe within the time frame that we have, within the school year, for example. Who's going to do it? So this is when, whether it's, manpower, do you need someone if you're going to make a pond or a fountain? That's an idea. Who's going to do that? Well, you would need somebody on the outside, probably, right? Somebody out in the community, a contractor, for example, because probably none of the students in your group are going to have access to a backhoe or a bulldozer or anything like that that could do something like installing a fountain. And then also, when does it need to be completed? So is there a time frame? For example, if you're a student council, and at the end of the school year, or maybe even earlier than the end of the school year, somebody else is going to rotate off and you're going to have elections. So have a timeline or a deadline, or understand at least when does your project need to be completed. And then step 3 is defining roles and setting that timeline. So that's kind of the next logical step. So it's really important to develop roles and responsibilities for each of those roles, and then to set timelines. So understand, again, when will the project need to be completed, and what are the stages during which the project needs to be completed. Define who's responsible for each of those steps. So you may need a chair, someone who's going to oversee each of the steps and make sure that each of the different component parts are being completed in a timely manner. You may need someone to do recruitment, to go out and try to recruit people to work on the project, to show up on whatever day it is you're going to plant the flowers for the campus beautification project. But you may need somebody else then to do outreach. So maybe you want to have someone who goes out and asks for donations from people in the community to donate towards flowers, or maybe donate goods in kind. So you go to the local nursery and ask if they can donate. Do you maybe go to one of the local landscape companies and ask if they can donate some tools to help you complete your project, or maybe show up and help you know how to complete your project. And then set checkpoints for progress. So those could be monthly or weekly or bi-monthly, where you have a meeting or you have some kind of a check-in, so that each person within a role is reporting to the chair about, this is what I've done, this is what's been completed, this is what needs to be done. That'll help you know that your project is moving towards completion, or that you've hit a snag and you need to go back and maybe reconsider, do we need to change our goal? Do we need to change our action item because we've realized that we've hit a snag? So be willing to make kind of those improvements as you go. So you want to be able to launch the project, then complete those tasks, and then when we get to the end, we will complete and measure those. So step 4 is very important, and that's communication. Sometimes we forget that we need to be communicating our plan with our stakeholders, and our stakeholders are just any group of people that may have an interest or a stake, we say, in what's going on in the project. And so if we're talking about our campus beautification project, then that could be sharing the project with other students, sharing it with faculty. If we're doing something on the elementary campus, maybe we need to share the project with parents. Certainly sharing it with maybe people in the community that would have an interest in that. The local garden club, for example, might be a good stakeholder to share our beautification project with. So communicate the plan with them, because you never know when they may have one of those stakeholders may have some feedback or some input that would be really important to your ability to carry out the project. And then communicate with each other. So work as a team. The fastest way for things to break down is a lack of communication, open communication. So again, we've talked about that with communicating and reporting along those timelines, but that's really important to share with others within the group as well. And then 5th, determine the success of the project once it's completed. So it's important to communicate your success of your projects with others, that you are measuring outcomes. And a lot of times we think about outcomes as being, things like dollars raised, if it's a fundraising project, for example. And that's very much a good measurable outcome. But there are other outcomes that are really often equally as important. So you should be measuring number of hours that have been dedicated, number of volunteers that you've had that have worked on a particular project. Obviously, number of dollars, but you could measure in our campus beautification project, number of flowers that have been planted, maybe number of people who interact with your project, whatever that may be. Those kinds of things are really important to help you know whether or not you've met your goal in a really meaningful manner. And a way of looking at that too is to look at whether or not your goal in our step number one was actually tangible and measurable. So as we think about number 5, I hope that makes you think about going back and making sure when we talk about in the very beginning, what is your goal? Is your goal something that is tangible and measurable? So if we think about our campus beautification project, you know, if it were a very lofty goal of I want to create more peace and harmony on the campus, that's going to be very difficult to measure, whether you're creating peace and harmony on campus. But if you say we want the campus to seem more peaceful, so we're going to make it more beautiful by planting flowers or plants around our campus, then we get to something that's a little more measurable than, we just want peace and harmony. Again, very admirable things. But from a project standpoint, we want it to be something that's tangible and measurable. And to do that, we've talked about some ways of measuring, but we can also do things like surveys. Surveys are a great way to measure our success with projects. At the Center for Ethics, we do surveys all the time. If you participate in things with us, we'll ask you to give us feedback for surveys. So that also helps us know whether or not we're when we set out a goal for a project that the Center for Ethics has, whether or not our project has meaningful and useful and tangible results as well. So surveys measure time passed, money raised, hours spent, number of people who are affected, all of those kinds of things. And then once you've done that, it's important to communicate those results back to your stakeholders. So we talked about at the beginning, talking and figuring out who's going to benefit from that. Communicate those results back to the people who have been affected by your project. So a newsletter, a social media post, those kinds of things are very easy ways for you to talk about the success of your project. Now, it's time to work together to create your own plan for your campus or your community. So think through those 5 steps that we've talked about and come up with a project that you can complete over the next few months. And then you'll record a 10-minute presentation about your plan. Be creative in the way that you present the information to us, because we will we'll watch them when we all come back together in the spring. Make sure your presentation is professional, not that everybody has to wear suits, but use good lighting and a good background and speak clearly for us so that we can hear you. And you'll be invited back to campus in the spring to present your project and the outcomes of your plan. And we really look forward to seeing all of them.